Yo, what is up, y'all? My name is Rob Donaldson, and welcome back to another edition of Rob's Best Bets. And in this episode, we are once again talking about college football here in Week 8. And my goodness, we have been absolutely killing it this season. Week after week after week, we are just steadily printing money in the sport of college football. And last week, when we brought in 6.22 units, once again, we were just producing a lot of units each week, and it really does feel like all of our angles, for the most part, are sound when we do place those big bets, when we do load up on volume. And in this episode, we have a lot of great picks as well for Week 8. And before we jump into those picks, I do want to take a second to shout out today's sponsor, Underdog Fantasy. And if you haven't already signed up using promo code ROBDFB, I highly recommend you do so. But with all that being said, y'all, let's go ahead and jump in to our picks here in Week 8. All right, first up, we are taking a look at that matchup on Wednesday between Delaware and Jacksonville State. And Delaware, in their first year up in the Division I level, have been very, very impressive, especially on the offensive side. And Jacksonville State has kind of been all over the place, 1 year removed from Rich Rod being in the building. And now, even though Jacksonville State is hosting this game, they are a 3-point underdog, and I do feel like it's warranted given the trajectory of both of those teams over the last couple weeks here. So let's go ahead and lay the 3 points here with the Blue Hens for 2 units for our first bet here in Week 8. For pick number 2, we are hopping over to Friday, where we have a matchup here in the Big Ten between Nebraska and Minnesota. And Nebraska, coming into the year, was everybody's darlings, and even though they've had offensive struggles and have kind of looked like an inconsistent version of what people really want them to be, they are still laying 8.5 points here on the road with what I really truly believe is an overrated quarterback in Dylan Raiola. I get it. He's got the name. He, talks as himself as like Patrick Mahomes and cosplays and all that sort of thing, but he does not play like Patrick Mahomes. He's a very static passer. He doesn't look great snap to snap. And yeah, he does have some good throws, but he has a lot of bad throws mixed in there, and that's been over the last 2 years, not just last week. And when you are looking at Minnesota in this game, yeah, I don't think they're lighting the world on fire, but they are a very respectable team, especially in these types of matchups. And inherently, I think we're getting a lot of value with Minnesota going up against Nebraska in this specific matchup. So let's go ahead and take the 8.5 points here with the Gophers for 3 units for our second bet here in Week 8. For pick number 3, we are staying on the Friday slate, where we have a matchup here between San Jose State and Utah State. And when you are looking at this game, and specifically the Spartans in this matchup, a lot of people find frustration with San Jose State, and I guess I get it to an extent. They had a lot of optimism coming into the year, but from a cover standpoint, we have bet on them 4 times. They have covered for us 3 of those 4 times. And once again, I think we're getting inherent value based on their win-loss record in this matchup, where I think points are going to be what ends up driving the final outcome. And San Jose State is getting 3.5 points in this matchup. I think there's a chance they win outright. So let's go ahead and take the 3.5 points for 2 units for our third bet here in Week 8. For pick number 4, we're heading out to the Big Ten, where we have a matchup here between Washington and Michigan. It's the noon Eastern window on Saturday, and Michigan is coming off that big loss against USC, and Washington has kind of been, not really playing a lot of meaningful games outside of that Ohio State game where their offense just couldn't move or against an elite unit. But Michigan, although their defense is good, it's not up to that same kind of level as Ohio State. And I do think when you're coming off of a big time, performance, the way that they did against Rutgers on Friday night, some things can really click for you after a bad loss against a team like an Ohio State. And Michigan on the other side, I'm not really bought into them being a top-end team in the Big Ten. I think Bryce Underwood still has a lot of development left to go. And Washington on the other side kind of feels like an ahead-of-the-schedule version of what Michigan is right now. And for that reason, when you are seeing Washington getting the 6 points here on the road, yeah, I get it from an atmosphere standpoint and playing in the big house, but this feels like a lot of points too many. So let's go ahead and take the 6 points here with the Huskies for 3 units for our fourth bet here in Week 8. For pick number 5, we are staying in that noon Eastern window where we have a matchup here between Duke and Georgia Tech. And once again, a big-time fun game between two high major or kind of power conference opponents. And when you are looking at Georgia Tech here, obviously we love this team. We have a lot of future stock invested in them. And this is a team that we've already made quite a bit of money on this season as well. But they are going on the road here against a Duke team that, yes, they've fallen short of a lot of expectations, but they do have an offense that can move the football. They do have a defense that I think is going to improve more and more as the season goes on here. And there is a reason why the unranked Duke Blue Devils are a favorite in this game. And yeah, I get it. There's going to be a lot of people back in Georgia Tech, but I am not going to be one of them. So let's go ahead and take Duke on the outright money line for 4 units for our fifth bet here in Week 8. For pick number 6, we are heading out to the SEC, where we have a matchup here between Oklahoma and South Carolina. And South Carolina's defense has been very, very impressive this season. Their offense, not so much. And when you are looking at Oklahoma, their offense has kind of been the highlight of this team's season so far. But when John Mateer came back last week against Texas, he was still a broken player. And I feel like they rushed him out far too fast. This offense looked completely ugly with him at the helm because, again, I don't think he's at full strength. And for that reason, even though we were kind of selling on South Carolina entering the season, now I kind of feel like there's a really good buy point on them. I felt the same last week, and it really did feel like they were going to cover that game. But here at home, against a team that has a win-loss record that I don't think is truly reflective of who they are during this week specifically, all of a sudden I think we have value here on the Gamecocks. So let's go ahead and take the 5.5 points here with South Carolina for 3 units for our 6th bet here in Week 8. For pick number 7, we are heading out to the Big Ten, where we have a matchup here between Purdue and Northwestern. And Northwestern, man, they are the reason that James Franklin no longer has a job. And Northwestern, although that's a huge win for Braun and for the program that I think was kind of trending in the wrong direction, I do think it was more of a Penn State shitting the bed situation rather than Northwestern just being, this team that's kind of up and up. And on the other side, Purdue, they played really well against Minnesota. Probably should have won that game. They've been playing a lot of good football over the last few weeks here, and I do think this is a program that's truly trending in the right direction. And last week, this game probably would have entered as a pick'em, and now we're getting 3 and a hook because of that Northwestern Penn State result. And for that reason, I say we go ahead and take the 3.5 points here for 4 units for our 7th bet here in Week 8. For pick number 8, we are taking a look at our very fun matchup here in the G5 between UNLV and Boise State. And when you are looking at this specific matchup, a lot of potential, future playoff aspirations at play here. And I do think when you're looking at UNLV in particular, this is a team that feels a little bit fraudulent. And although Boise State started the season on the wrong foot against South Florida, kind of getting blown out in that game, they have been playing a lot better football as of late, and now we're seeing an 11.5-point line, I think for good reason. And although that's a massive line against an undefeated team that, if you look over this matchup's history, UNLV has actually been better over the last couple years, I do think that Boise State is going to have a good chance of laying the wood against Dan Mullen in this bunch. So let's go ahead and lay the 11.5 points here for 2 units for our 8th bet here in Week 8. All right, next up, we are taking a look at a really fun matchup here between UTSA and North Texas. And North Texas got absolutely bludgeoned by South Florida last week, but they did so, I guess, got bludgeoned rather, even though they scored 36 points. And that's because they gave up 63 to South Florida. And that's kind of been the tenor of the Eric Morris era so far. They can put up points, but they give up a lot in return. And UTSA is a team that all year has shown up well on the defensive side of the ball, but offensively have kind of sputtered in terms of finding that consistent form of offense. But in this matchup, I do think that UTSA has a really good upper hand. The blueprint is out on how to kind of handle North Texas, and I do think those early wins that North Texas was rattling off are going to start to simmer downwards. And getting 4.5 points in this matchup, I love the Roadrunners. Go ahead and give me those 4.5 points for 3 units for our 9th bet here in Week 8. All right, next up, we are taking a look at a matchup here between Ohio State and Wisconsin. And if you followed me over the years, you know that from day one, I knew that Luke Fickell and his approach to this program was going to spell disaster. And I didn't think it was going to be this bad. And this is insane because Wisconsin is completely dog shit. And when you do kind of get blown out at home against Iowa, obviously you draw a lot of eyeballs because the tenor, the narrative that surrounds Iowa football is they can't score at all. And so if they blank you by scoring 30 plus points, well, hey, you're probably the butt of a lot of jokes all week long. And I do think that those jokes are warranted, but what I do know about sports betting is you want to align yourself with the teams that nobody wants to bet on because the spreads are the great equalizer in this. The sports books know that everybody wants to back Ohio State at a number that's less than 28.5, and so they hang out this 26.5 point line. And although Wisconsin is not going to win this game, covering the 26.5 points, I think is very, very doable, and I think they're going to do it. So let's go ahead and take the points to the Badgers begrudgingly for 3 units for our 11th bet here in Week 8. All right, next up, we are heading out to the ACC, where we have 2 teams from the ACC that made the college football playoff last year, and we also have 2 teams who will not be back. I firmly believe that at this point, and I think when you are looking at this game here between SMU and Clemson, one, we're going to see some points, but I really do think the bulk of the points are going to come on the side of the Clemson Tigers. And although this is a team that I don't firmly believe in, I do think that they're better than what they're being billed as. And in this matchup, laying the 9.5 points, I know that a lot of people are going to be back in SMU, but I will not get there with that team. And I do think that Clemson has a really good chance to win this game going away. So let's go ahead and lay the 9.5 points here with the Tigers for 2 units here in Week 8. All right, next up, we are taking a look at my favorite game on the board here between Texas A&M and the Arkansas Razorbacks. And Arkansas, Road Rash Face, Bobby Petrino, whatever you want to call him, man, he's back at the helm for Arkansas, and they played well last week against Tennessee in Knoxville. And now they're taking on a Texas A&M team that has looked very impressive in a lot of different spots this year, although that defense has kind of looked suspect on occasion. And even though the last couple weeks they've played offenses that haven't really been able to take advantage of that fact, what really worries me in this game and in this particular matchup is Colin Klein for Texas A&M at offensive coordinator feels like a complete coward, and he feels like he's out of his depth coaching in the SEC. It was very apparent in a lot of second and shorts where he wasn't taking the deep shot, and then all of a sudden in that next series of downs, the drive stalls out. And when you're going up against a guy like a Bobby Petrino, who's been there and done that for years at different programs, and now has an offense that I feel like is humming better than ever, all of a sudden I think we're getting a ton of value betting on a team with the ugly-looking win-loss record that isn't truly playing like a team with that type of win-loss record. And getting 7.5 points here at home in Fayetteville, I say we take them for 5 units here in Week 8. All right, next up, we are heading out to the American, where we have a matchup here between Memphis and UAB, and a lot of different storylines going in this matchup because Memphis is finally playing kind of up to what I think of the capability of this program has always been, and although I think they're a very legitimate contender for that G5 playoff spot, I do think they're starting to catch some lines that are a little bit inherently inflated. And UAB, this has been an offense all year that has actually been able to move the ball. It's been the defense that's actually been terrible. And Trent Dilfer, he was a disaster from day one. Kind of felt like a gimmicky hire, and it proved out to be gimmicky in terms of the results of him at the helm as well. And as we've seen time and time again with UCLA, Virginia Tech, a number of other teams as well, sometimes with an interim head coach, you can just kind of get up and you can play a lot better football for short periods of time. And I do think UAB getting 21.5 points here is one of those stabs that I think is very, very nice. And not only on top of that in terms of the full game spread, but let's go ahead and actually take a stab here at the first half money line at plus 540. I think that both are very, very live because, again, this UAB offense is actually kind of respectable. It's been the defense has been terrible, and if that side of the ball can find any sort of juice in the early goings, all of a sudden I think we have a really easy bet that we can cash at 5-1 odds. So let's go ahead and lock those two in here in Week 8. All right, next up, we are taking a look at a matchup here between Hawaii and Colorado State. And when you are looking at this game here, it's a very off-the-radar matchup, and probably for good reason. But coming into the year, Colorado State had a lot of expectations, and they have fallen way short of a lot of those expectations because they've dropped a lot of close games. The offense hasn't looked as good, at least from the outset, that everybody kind of thought they would look. And I do think over recent weeks, they are catching momentum on both sides of the ball at the perfect time to kind of be that good bargain bin shopping kind of team when you are looking at the sports betting market. And Hawaii on the other side with that 5-2 record, it's kind of an empty-ish 5-2 record, and I do think that Colorado State is going to find a way to win this game at the end of the day. So let's go ahead and take the Rams here on the money line for 2 units for our third to last bet here in Week 8. All right, next up, we are taking a look at a matchup here between Texas and Kentucky. And Texas is coming off that Red River Shootout win over Oklahoma. But once again, they are playing a team that, in terms of Oklahoma last week, they played a team, rather, that had a broken QB. And it just kind of seems like Texas keeps drawing that kind of style where, yeah, they're playing a team of a notable brand, but they didn't have their top guy at full strength, or they didn't have their top guy at all pretty much in terms of John Mateer. And I do think when you're looking at Texas offensively, they still look very, very unimpressive. And Arch Manning, despite all the hype, despite all the pressure that he's probably facing, the reality of the situation is that he's just not there. And I don't think that this Texas offense is ever going to kind of materialize into something worthwhile this season. But we're still kind of getting these lines of 12.5 in Lexington that would suggest that Texas is going to break out offensively at some point, and I just do not see it happening. I get it. Kentucky's a team that's not very impressive in a lot of different facets, but I do think they can run the ball, and they're going to be able to kind of control the game in terms of the clock from that side of things. And 12.5 points, that's a lot to lay, and so I say we take them for 2 units for our second to last bet here in Week 8. All right, for our final bet here in Week 8, we are actually staying in the SEC, where we have a matchup here between Missouri and Auburn, and this is Missouri's first road game of the season. I'm not lying. It's Week 8. They have not played on the road. And a lot of times, we see this every single year, but usually it's kind of within that first, 3, 4, 5 week pocket. The first time you hit the road, especially in conference play, it's different. Your expectations are probably a lot higher because you are grooving at home, but it doesn't always translate so fluidly the second you hit the road. And although Auburn has kind of been an up and down team this year, and more so down than up, and Hugh Freeze, who knows? If he loses this game, he's probably fired. And for that reason, I think there's added motivation to the Auburn side. Obviously, last week against Georgia, they played actually respectably well. Decent argument that they should have won the game. And I do think when there's a lot of that kind of thing lingering out there of Missouri's first road test, it's going to be a loud environment, even though Auburn is not a good team. And you also have a coach who's coaching for his future. I think a lot of those things add up to a big time sort of upset in this spot. And so let's go ahead and take the Auburn Tigers on the outright money line for 4 units for our final bet here in Week 8. All that being said, I really want to thank you guys for checking out today's video, and I want to shout you guys out for just showing support on these videos throughout the college football season. And although we didn't get this video out for the Tuesday slate, make sure you guys are tuning in on Twitter for the bets earlier in the week, because Tuesday night is where I'm going to post these college football plays. We still don't know the results of those college football games. Hopefully we win. Right now, it's kind of looking like we're going to be going 0 for 2, and so this record on the beginning of the video might need to get updated. We'll see. I mean, ultimately, anything can happen in college football, but with all that being said, y'all, I appreciate you guys. Let's have another fantastic week, and as I always say, I will see you in a future video. Take it easy.